Hello, folks. My name is Rachel Wilkins. Welcome to the Smart Art Business Podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by David Bianchi. David is a multidisciplinary artist, actor, motivator, and poet. And David is here today to tell me a little bit about his award-winning spoken word film, which just debuted as an NFT. David, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be on a platform like yours where we can talk about art and inspire people in the process.
Absolutely. So I do want to kind of jump right in with this. You are somebody who's had substantial success, continues to have substantial success as an actor, starring in multiple movies, popular TV shows. With such a decorated career, as an actor in front of the camera, what brings you back to these other art forms?
Sure. And thank you for saying that. And I always believe that there is no there, right? I'm nowhere near the destination. I'm perpetually on the journey, your question is strong because like we said earlier off air, I'm an artist first, right? I may earn a living as an actor. I'm also an independent film producer. I'm also a film director, screenwriter. I earned a congratulatory letter from former LA Mayor Villaraigosa for my artistic endeavors in Los Angeles for my fine artwork and doing gallery exhibits around LA and Beverly Hills. So I'm very much interdisciplinary artist. I spent a lot of my time, capturing, 35 millimeter black and white stills with a Nikon camera. And so it's part of me, it just is part of me. I see the world through colors, textures, temperatures. I deal with spreadsheets, but I hate them. I deal with numbers, but I hate them. And so the answer to your question is just because it's intrinsically part of who I am. And as far as and poetry is obviously one of the things that I'm widely known for, not just as an actor and as a filmmaker, but also as a spoken word poet. And I have been involved with words that rhyme since I was a child. As long as I can remember, I loved the way that words sounded when they phonetically rhymed. And then I was a freestyle battle rapper in upstate New York. So it was during the heyday of hip hop. I could still freestyle most cats under the table. And then eventually in 2001, I discovered slam poetry. And that was when I was at Arizona State University. So I went head first and I competed in national slam competitions, and I was producing slam poetry competitions. That eventually took me to about 2004. I remember there was a pivotal point when I was looking at CNN.com, and the breaking news in a big red banner was Jennifer and Brad had split up. And directly beneath that, in about 10-point type, 14 soldiers had died in Fallujah during the American occupation of Iraq. And it broke my spine. And at the time, I was a poet in Hollywood. And so that was the first time that I wrote a social political piece that was basically called Soldier. That was about what it might feel like to lose a comrade in your arms in battle. And that became my first spoken word film. And so that film called Soldier ended up going on to be critically acclaimed, and it played 16 festivals worldwide and won a bevy of festivals. And so that was my first foray into creating experimental films that are told in poetry. And so I've spent the better of 16 years producing poetic experimental films that I now call Spinema, spinning cinema through spoken word.
What do you think what do you think the spoken word gives you that perhaps other art forms cannot? What is it, do you feel that you're able to express, in a deeper way?
Sure. As an actor, it's like, I'm grateful for this incredible vocation, and I'm grateful to inspire people that way. But when I'm hired as an actor, I follow the script. I'm hired to know my lines, hit my marks, and shut the and stay out of the way and be a part of the process and be a worker amongst workers. As it relates to being a poet, I'm able to express myself freely. And because of the art form, I'm able to sort of really access my First Amendment rights to have my freedom of speech that doesn't infringe on my work as an actor, right? And so this art form for me, because of my background with rhyming and freestyle and all that, it just makes sense that I can be a storyteller through the poetic verse. Right? So that's the most important thing for me. And it is an art form that I'm very good at, right? I mean, just because you're a writer, just because you're a good poet doesn't make you a good performer. See, I resent the term spoken word, to be quite honest, because every word is spoken, including yours. So what makes everybody different from one another, you know? It's just a branding that's followed on since the Harlem Renaissance. You know, so for me, if you're a good writer, doesn't make you a good performer. And if you're a good performer, doesn't make you a person that's qualified to perform in cinema, because you're playing with a variety of languages, not just a written word, but translating the written text into a moving, palpable piece of art, something that the audience can evoke from your physical form. You could put me on mute and still feel something when I'm performing, right? You just through my physical form. And then also understanding the nuances of all the languages of cinema, you know, light, picture, and sound, and being able to sometimes be nuanced for the camera and sometimes being visceral for the camera. These are art forms that you have to understand. I mean, it's almost easier to take a good actor and turn them into a poet than it is to take a poet and turn them into an actor.
Mm. What do you think, or who are your heroes kind of growing up? Was there a particular poet or somebody, you know, an actor or some kind of creative that was your hero?
I'm a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe. I actually have an Edgar Allan Poe t-shirt. But as far as heroes, I look more towards heroes in Hollywood, people like Sidney Poitier, people like Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman. These are the faces, the figures that I looked up to. I looked up to people like Anthony Hopkins, you know, some more of the classically trained guys. I was very interested in the guys that had a theater lineage. I remember when Saul Williams blew up off the strength of his Sundance film, and sort of like Saul Williams kind of like put spoken word on the map. At least that film did. And that was just like, wow, I was like, holy shit, like spoken word could be a commercial vehicle. And that really blew the doors open for me, you know, and I was like, this is something I'm going to do. And as I said, I've spent the better of 16 years producing these films, not because I'm not paying the rent with them. And I mean, if anything, over the course of my career, I've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my own films and producing my own features and producing my own shorts and my own, you know. So this is just something that I believe is my fertilizer for social movements.
So the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer galvanized the world, the nation, you know, a whole generation. The title of your poem, your spoken word NFT, is "I Can't Breathe," an echo to Mr. Floyd's last words.
Correct.
How in that moment last year, in that moment of grief, in that moment of just disarray, were you able to find the words to write something so profound and so eloquent?
Um, the poem itself initially was called "Collapsed Neck." That was the original name of the piece. And it was basically a project that came out of real exasperation, because I think that just like many people in America, when in the world, you know, first we saw what happened and we were shocked. Then we were surprised, we were shocked, we were appalled, and then that became anger, and then that anger became rage, and then that rage became marching and exactly. And I was in the streets, and you know, flashbangs and tear gas and all that was going on around us. Living in Los Angeles, it was intense. But after that, after the rage, there was just an exhaustion where I became almost like a shell of a human being, because I didn't have tears left. I didn't have anger left. And I think that for any people of color, anywhere, any first world nation, have not, if you're a person of color in a first world nation anywhere in the world, you have experienced racism in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's micro racism, whether it's verbal, whether it's physical racism or physical attack. And so I think that what happened for so many people of color is that there was a lifting of micro resentments that have been buried beneath us. And like I remember moments of the first time I was called a nigger when I was in second grade by my principal, my school principal, you know, took my referral and said, "Here, boy, you know, I'm going to put this here in my nigger box. I don't want you coming back because I don't want my nigger box getting full." And so these are the things that resurfaced for me. I remember being called Mowgli from Jungle Book when I was a kid. I remember, I remember being told by the kids in my neighborhood that I couldn't use the bathroom because their parents wouldn't let us. They used to make me and my sister go in the woods, So all these things came up, and millions of other people of color had moments like that where things came up. And so I wanted to write a soliloquy, which was a reflection of my pain, but just from a perspective of not just the death of Mr. Floyd, but from a perspective of the entire history of what it means to be a person of color in America. And working with my director, Ryan LeMasters, this was during the pandemic, so it was basically two of us in one room, camera on sticks, a mic on sticks, and then we did all the rest of the post-production work in After Effects. But it needed to be told not from a place of fury and anger, because we knew we weren't going to touch people, whether you're one of my Caucasian counterparts or whether you're a person of color. By the time that we released this poem, nobody wanted to be screamed at. Nobody wanted opinions. Nobody wanted to be barked at. So I think what's really effective about the piece is that I really come from a place of exasperation. And I don't really come from a place of major opinion. I just come from a place of subtle facts. And it's really landed in people's hearts. And anyone that watches the film will understand that sometimes it just calls for coming from a place of heartbreak. Think about like a relationship, if the man or woman cheats on you, it gets to a point when that person walks in the room and you're done, you don't have any scream left. You're just like, you know what, just fine, you cheated on me. Just get your stuff and just go, and that's the pain. That's the pain that I think that I felt, and that's the shell sort of sensibility that the written word came from.
I think a lot about ancestral trauma and the experiences that our ancestors had, and how as Black Americans that you don't even have the time or opportunity to process ancestral trauma that has existed because you're living in trauma, still living in this experience. And I can't imagine how palpable that anger is. But to see somebody be able to express it in a way that is, like you said, you're not yelling, you're coming at this looking for a conversation, right? Trying to inspire understanding. But I feel there's so much, certainly in what we've seen in the last 4 years, there's so much tone deafness, right? There's people who just don't want to hear, they don't want to listen, they don't want to learn. They're fine in their little box. When we look at things like Fox News and the propaganda on the internet and all these conversations that came up about the Black Lives Matter movement, it's just sometimes seems impossible to make change in this country. What have you experienced in terms of those challenges, and how do you combat that and address that as a creative? Do you feel that your art has the power to reach across those aisles?
I believe that it does. I believe that, I mean, look, at the end of the day, for the most part, the art that I create, I'm singing to the church, right? I'm singing to people that are already on my side of the aisle. And I think that I can't breathe because of the way that it's positioned, the way that it's framed, that it's just me in the shadows speaking into the void, theoretically. And the metaphor of that is that it's the shadow and voice of the person of color still living in the shadows and speaking into the nothingness. There's only one point in the film at about the last 10 seconds where I actually look into the camera and address the audience. And it's very strong and very powerful, and everything is meticulously placed. And I think that this piece, it broadcasts on KTLA's award-winning series called Breaking Bias. Deadline magazine hailed it in Hollywood for its integrity. And I think that the fact that it's even been seen by the Floyd family and been literally just exalted as a powerful, powerful film that they highly endorse is a real example of how much impact that this thing is having. Because if you think about trauma for a family like the Floyd family, with all the trauma that they have experienced, for them to be able to watch the film and have those feelings re-evoked and have them co-sign the film and endorse it as something that they stand beside, I think really is a testament to not just the power of the film, but the power of the language and how the language is delivered. I think that to address your question about people on the other side of the aisle, conversation can cross the canal. Anger, resentment, and hostility does not. Right? And ancestral trauma is very real. A lot of the times we don't even realize that we're feeling it. And a lot of the times people of color, specifically in America and other first world nations, we just have a social code about us. There's just certain things that we just do, innately, to create a sense of protectionism, in society,
Something I was thinking about when you were just sharing was how, as artists, the external world often quantifies our success in monetary terms, right? And how much did the painting sell for? How much did you get for the movie, the script, etc.? But I think certainly for me, and I'm interested to hear what your opinion is. Often the success has been quantified for me when I have a real human reaction to the work, or it moves somebody emotionally. How does it feel to you to know that the Floyd family endorsed this piece of work and were moved by this piece of work?
I wept. And I want to, really issue some thanks to the NFT community, the Clubhouse NFT community, because I have to be honest, none of this would be possible. This conversation we're having right now wouldn't even happen if it weren't for the Clubhouse NFT community and the incredible support that I received therein. Guys like Farouk and Paulo and Wolf and, and Noah, and Jay. These are all very, very powerful Clubhouse moderators who saw my work and said, wow, we co-sign what you're doing here. And so I have to give a shout out to those guys, because speaking with the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, and just so everybody knows, the first ever award-winning spoken word NFT drop was this film that we're talking about, I Can't Breathe, and it ended up closing at auction for 5 Ethereum, which by today's standards is about $10,500, which is a significant amount of money. And it was a successful Genesis drop, and we are donating all those funds to the George Floyd Memorial Foundation to be able to put money into civil rights. And so as a result of that work, it got seen by the Floyd family, and I wept when I found out that they loved the film, because it doesn't get better than that for me. Like, okay, wow. And your notion about the money is like, yeah, I mean, as an artist, especially in the NFT world, it's so super saturated, you're only as good as your last drop, and you want to keep climbing, just like star power in Hollywood. You're only as good as your last box office break or flop. So those metrics are important, and for me, I look forward to continuing to pave this road of minting Spinema spoken word films that all have socially conscious undertones. And every single drop, I have made the commitment to contribute a large portion of those proceeds to a 501c3 that's associated with the topic of each specific film.
It's amazing. It is a really exciting time. This NFT space is really just erupting right now. Something that's come up for me as I've been dropping into Clubhouse rooms, and for a little context for anybody who's listening who doesn't understand the parallels between Clubhouse and the NFT space. Clubhouse is kind of existing alongside these selling platforms as a vehicle to promote, I guess, your drops and to have meaningful discussions around the work that folks are actually dropping on these NFT selling platforms, I guess you could call them. What actions are you seeing within these communities to ensure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are actually being brought to the table for these conversations? Because I think, like everything else in the arts, it feels very white male dominated. I mean, I'm in these Clubhouse rooms and I hear, just a lot of the same voices.
Sure.
And I'm very, I'm just literally dipping my toe in this space. Are you seeing anything? Are you involved in anything that's, trying to really make sure that everybody truly has a seat at the table?
Sure. I think it's a great question. You're absolutely right. I mean, and it's not just the NFT sector. I mean, if you look at the tech sector in general, right, because the NFT sector is a parallel to the tech sector. But to to answer the question, like I made it a strong point to connect with the small communities. There are like Black NFT and Black NFT artists. There's a couple Instagram groups and a couple Clubhouse groups that are smaller, but I made sure that I wanted to connect with them and may have conversations with them, as well as being on the bigger platforms, like, to be connected with NFT House, for example. I mean, we are opening Clubhouse drop party. So for anybody out there that doesn't understand the Clubhouse space, when we say drop party, that's basically a big Clubhouse room where people are announcing the opening auction of a NFT. That's what we call a drop party. And then you have a closing auction party where you sort of like have a conversation to the countdown of the closing of the auction. So just to give people context, I was in a room with over 2,500 people. Wow. Talking about this piece. And so that sort of exposure, where very established celebrities are hearing me speak and seeing the work and being connected to the work. And of course that adds value. So it's very, very an important piece. And I wanted to not only just introduce myself as an artist of color that's producing socially conscious work, because I also want to be able to leave a wake of inspiration behind me. Because I want other spoken word poets to come behind me and be like, holy shit, look at what David's doing. I can do this too. That the NFT space and the technology and the blockchain is not threatening. It's not a threatening place. It's an inclusive place. Now, of course, people of color and women alike are very underrepresented in this space, no question about it. But the doors are open if you're brave enough to walk through the doors. And so I've had countless conversations with people of color as a result of the work that I've done in the last month, where I'm inspiring people and I'm talking to people, get into NFTs. Even if you go on Rarible and you just start do your first little mint, like figure it out and don't be afraid of it, because there's big potential here. The other thing that I think is very important about the landscape of the NFT community is that for me, it's been revolutionary in that I spent the better of 16 years showing these films to the film festival circuit, and some of them have been on YouTube, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. You get a lot of hand claps and pats in the back. But the people in the NFT community are mostly college educated, are mostly tech driven. Most importantly, they are art hungry, and they understand and respect highbrow art. Spinema, my art form, is very highbrow art. Mm-hmm. And not only is the makeup of the NFT landscape all those things, they're smart, they're well-to-do, they respect art, and they're influential. Mm. And as a result of those things, we're having this conversation now, and we're making real change, right? So we think about the movement now with the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. I'm working with them to now establish and help them establish a crypto wallet. Wow. So I want to be able to get the Ethereum to the George Floyd Foundation through the blockchain so that it's on the open ledger. There's no confusion as to where the money went, right? Because that was part of the campaign of the project. But now I want to eventually have a Clubhouse talk with the George Floyd Memorial Foundation Executive Director to talk about the celebration of the NFT community and the work that they're doing, and hopefully have their digital wallet on their site while we're speaking in real time so people can contribute Ethereum to them so they can continue to raise money. And now, as a result of this, we're introducing the blockchain to inner city Black communities and civil rights communities. That's massive. Yeah, it's massive, right? And that's all of the strength of this drop. Yep. And so the amount of change that's happening culturally and now even financially with introducing them to the block is exponential.
I do get a sense, as much as I'm, pointed out some of the faults that I've seen in this space, I do get a real sense of philanthropic endeavor. Like there's efforts there to support, marginalized groups, to support, funds and charities and organizations that really need that. But also I get a sense of there's the willingness to share connections. I think often in the creative world where, the spaces certainly that I've moved around in, there's often an unwillingness to share connections and to make introductions, but it feels a little bit more fertile in this space for some reason. I don't know quite why that is. Perhaps because people can't see each other. Right. But, one of the things I was thinking about as well is it is kind of a strange concept when you like you just shared about having your drop party and being in a room with 2,500 people, but you could be sitting in your pajamas, right? You could be sitting in your sweatpants. This whole new landscape is so interesting and in some ways challenging, in some ways, a better landscape. How do you think when we do resume normalcy post-COVID. How do you think those two worlds will coexist?
Well, I mean, we can only speculate on what the future will look like. And I have to echo what you said, is that what I've discovered, and I've said this many times in rooms, what I've discovered in the NFT Clubhouse community is very unusual. As a person who works in Hollywood and major television and motion picture, like that sort of generosity, informational generosity, camaraderie generosity, that doesn't happen in Hollywood. People are very guarded about their intellectual properties and their ideas and their resources and their contacts. But the NFT community has been so warm and so gentle and so opening, because I think it's really a movement that people that are inside, they just want to share because they want to see it grow. We believe in the blockchain, and we believe in the idea of being able to perpetuate art and be self-sustaining as artists and have residual pay through art. And that's one of the biggest things that the NFT non-fungible token offers, which is residual pay in perpetuity through the smart contract. So that's awesome. I also think it's very important for artists to know that when you are stepping out into the Clubhouse space, that a lot of the times people, investors and collectors, they're not just investing in my film, I Can't Breathe. They're investing in David Bianchi, right? So when you're in these Clubhouse talks, you have to really be cautious and present yourself well, right? Know your shit. You have to have great art, number one, right? But beyond that, these collectors are listening to you speak. And how do you carry yourself? What do you stand for? Who are you in this space, right? Because it's like you buy Tesla at 600 because you believe it's going to go to 1,000 a share, right? And I think that the NFT space is very synonymous with that. So these collectors, if they're buying my Genesis piece, they're not just buying into the film, they're buying into David Bianchi, into the speculative idea that David Bianchi will continue to perpetuate this work into the community, and he will continue to rise in value. Right. And so that's something else that artists need to be thinking about, that if you don't have, if you're not really good at speaking, fucking get good at it, and because it is about, that's one of the things that Clubhouse does, is it breaks that barrier of intimacy where you're able to tap into the artist and speak to the artist, sometimes in vulnerable states, sometimes in their best states, right? And so it's very important that artists be aware of that, because optics are important, So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, as somebody who, is a professional speaker, what tips could you perhaps offer to the more introverted artists who may be listening and realizing that, yes, they do have to step into this space? And I think often that there's a misconception that you have to just be a gifted speaker.
Sure.
It is something that in many ways you can be taught or can be learned. Is there something that you may perhaps be willing to share?
Sure, absolutely. I'm a classically trained actor, and I have the knack for this thing, right? I'm obviously being a poet and being a in front of the camera guy. What I would advise anyone, if you're not a comfortable speaker, is like there's videos on YouTube all over the place that can show you basic techniques on how to communicate. Hit your consonants, lips, teeth, tip of the tongue, lips, teeth, tip of the tongue, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. These are actor training, vocal exercises. Know your audience, right? Know what your audience wants to hear at that time, because at the end of the day, yeah, you're being yourself, but you are kind of, being a bit of a salesperson too, right? And be okay with being vulnerable. When you're speaking, it's okay to be naked. It's okay to speak about your pain. It's okay to talk about your process in a way that's intimate, because people want to get to know the individual. People want to know that you're okay with revealing yourself. That's the language of the heart. Those are the Me Too moments that I think audiences are really hungry for. What's going to keep someone in a clubhouse, for 10, 15, 20, even an hour, 2 hours? So think about the compelling points of you as an artist and what makes you intrinsically unique, right? Outside of the art, what are the things that make you tick? Talk about those things, because if we're talking about a brand, right, you want to know what's under the hood. Learn how to tell stories in colors, learn how to paint vivid pictures for people. how to rein people with, floating dandelions in the warm spring sun and tickling their hearts with emotions and butterfly taps, and of course, I have the gift of being a little more, colorful in my vernacular, but it's important, I think, mostly just to be really honest and really genuine. And one of the things that people don't realize when they're speaking is there's times where Clubhouse has great sonic capacity. So sometimes use the whisper to your advantage. Sometimes get big if you need to, but use the mic to your advantage. These are little techniques that I think people can take and put in their pockets.
I'm getting an ASMR vibe from the whispers. The other thing I think is important to note is that this idea of perfection, like for somebody listening to you or, watching this right now and thinking, well, David's an expert, David's so eloquent, David's been professionally trained, I cannot put myself out there until I'm at this level. What do you say to that?
Get out of your own fucking way. Get out of your way. Just stop fighting yourself. We are our own worst enemies. There is nothing worse than establishing a psychological blockade to perpetuate your work into the ether. Nothing worse. Listen, a great director that I follow, Robert Rodriguez, he said, everybody's got 10 bad movies in their system. So hurry up and start making bad movies so you can get to your career. So just work, and also embrace the imperfections. That's what makes you the artist, right? I mean, even if you look at my independent films, no film is perfect. If you look at David Fincher, for crying out loud, Fincher's known for doing 50, 60 takes. And he sometimes doesn't get it right. If you're not going to get it right on 50, 60 takes, because even Fincher will admit that in his heart, there are a lot of what he feels are imperfections in his films. Although we look at them and we're like, wow, they're masterpieces, right? So at no point will we ever feel perfect with it. But I think that the distinction between the writer and the author and the painter and the artist is that the second category knows when to walk back and say it's done and accept the imperfections, not as imperfections, but as subtleties and nuances of your artistic signature, right? I think Picasso said that one of the most violent acts that an artist can create is the first brushstroke, because we spend the rest of our time trying to correct that violent error. And so the things that you believe are imperfect are your identity. That's how you conceptualize and emit art into the world. So be okay with those things. Now, mind you, I'm not to say that, if you're really unhappy with something, there's nothing wrong with being unhappy with something. I've had projects that I've made that just never saw the light of day because they just didn't feel like they had that kind of value. And I also think it's important to understand to not waste people's time, right? If someone is going to give you their captive audience, I think that we have a responsibility to ourselves, but also to our audience to not waste their time. They're giving you captive audience. So please respect that captive audience, right? Because you only get one shot with most people, especially in this hyper quick, hyper realistic social media, that world. So how are you going to honor your audience, right? And make them want to come back and hear you and see you and participate in your circle again.
So I want to read an excerpt from your poem, if I may. Judge, jury, and execution by a man dressed in blue. We're in the midst of the trial of the officer who killed Mr. Floyd. This is an endless list. Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, George Floyd, this week, Deontay Wright, Philando Castro. The list is endless. Are you in this moment considering a follow-up to this piece?
Not a follow-up to this piece, but I am already staging my next drop. We're sort of putting together what the inventory of it is going to be. And it's a very, very visceral piece called You Can't Hear Me. And it's also an injustice piece. It's me and two other poets, myself and Mr. Malcolm Jamal Warner. Malcolm is a Grammy winner and Emmy nominated actor, widely known for playing Bill Cosby's son in The Cosby Show, but now is one of the leads on Fox's show The Resident. But also he's widely known. He won a Grammy for his spoken word work. So it's an injustice piece. It will drop in the top to the middle of May, around about May 14th, which is a pivotal date for me. And so the follow-up to the Genesis will be that piece, and it's visceral. It's a far departure from the cinematic style of I Can't Breathe. And you're right, it is almost as if it's not even a pandemic. It's almost as if police brutality is a syndrome. Because we wonder, when is it going to stop, right? We thought that body cameras were going to slow it down. Well, no, they're just doing it anyways, just with cameras on their chest, until there is real consequence for members of the police force, the behavior will persist, right? It's just like guns in America. Until there's real consequence for either gun manufacturers, or we start to put in real legislation that will ban weapons on the street, these mass shootings will persist. I don't have the answer to the solution. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawmaker. I'm just an artist with an opinion. But I hope that my voice can continue to evoke discussion, and can continue to offer healing, and can continue to raise money for nonprofits, and hopefully change the world one frame at a time.
Incredible. I think that's a wonderful place to close off our conversation, David. I cannot thank you enough for bringing this to us. If you wouldn't mind, if you could tell people where they can learn more about you, where they can find out about this drop, and of course, where they can purchase one of these amazing NFTs.
Sure. So the one of one is now, the auction is closed, but it's on ephemera. But for anyone that's out there that's inspired by this, you can go to my Rarible, go to Rarible / David Bianchi, and there are a few collectibles still left. As of today, there's about 10 or 12 left of 30, which are priced at 0.1 Ethereum and 0.2 Ethereum. And those proceeds are also going to be contributed to the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. So come be a part of the Genesis movement. And the new drop is going to be massive. I really am very, very excited about it. And it will be dropped in 2 places. A large portion of it will be dropped on a new platform called Obtainable. And we're building the assets for that right now. And that's going to be right around May 14th. So watch out for a piece called You Can't Hear Me. It's a very, very powerful, powerful piece of cinematic spoken word. And I'll leave you a little hook of that. The hook of that is, my eyes open wide, I feel blind, you can't see me. I open my mouth and I scream, you can't hear me. Fight for justice, can't trust this. My heart, I stand bleeding. You cut out my tongue and I swear you can't hear me.
Wow.
So that's the chorus of that piece. Yeah, and anybody, please follow me. Go on my YouTube channel, YouTube David Bianchi, Instagram David Bianchi Official, Twitter David Bianchi, and you can find these films. And if you go on YouTube or if you go on Ephemera, you can watch I Can't Breathe, and I highly recommend it. It's a powerful piece of work, and I think it will definitely touch your heart.
Well, I'm sure this conversation has inspired many of our listeners. David, I do hope you'll come back and share your success and your stories with us, maybe in a year or two's time, just to give us some feedback on how this whole process went. And I thank you so much for spending this time with us today.
Oh, bless you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
All right, folks, that is a wrap. This has been the Smart Art Business Podcast. If you are enjoying these episodes, do consider leaving us a review and, of course, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much, folks.